It's been a year of pain for so many and massive gains for a select few billionaires. We begin today's show looking at a new report that names the biggest pandemic profiteers over the past year. As unemployment surged at the start of the lockdowns, the Institute for Policy Studies began working with Americans for Tax Fairness to track the wealth growth of U.S. billionaires. They've just published their findings that show the combined wealth of the 657 billionaires in the country grew more than $1.3 trillion, nearly 45% since the pandemic began. This comes as a record number of people in the United States lost their jobs and struggled to put food on the table. Food banks reported massive lines, and mutual aid groups popped up across the United States to help those in need. This is Harlem resident Ruth Crawford speaking from a food bank last Thanksgiving.
You have to try to relax and think of the better things, because it wasn't always like this. But this is getting to people, and it's just sad. I mean, you work all the time, and then you can't go to work, or you can't work from home, so it's not easy.
Billionaires like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg all saw their bank accounts swell amidst the global crisis. This month, Senators Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders and others proposed an ultra-millionaire tax to tax fortunes above $50 million. Senator Sanders hosted a hearing on the inequality crisis last week.
We'll be asking about how it happens that the top 1/10 of 1% now owns more wealth than the bottom 90%. 1/10 of 1% more wealth than the bottom 90%. And two individuals, Bezos and Musk, now own more wealth than the bottom 40%. And meanwhile, we're looking at more hunger in America than at any time in decades.
Senator Sanders is holding another hearing today. For more, we're joined by Chuck Collins, director of the Institute for Policy Studies program on inequality and author of their new report, A Year of Billionaire Pandemic Gains. Chuck Collins is also the author of The Wealth Hoarders, How Billionaires Pay Millions to Hide Trillions. Chuck, welcome back to Democracy Now! Who are the pandemic profiteers and how they do it?
Well, good morning, Amy. And you mentioned a couple who, like Jeff Bezos, like Elon Musk. But what we found was that there was a whole group of people, almost 50 billionaires, whose wealth has gone up over 100%. And they are often leading companies who have benefited from the pandemic conditions by having essentially their competition shut down. So they're the online retailers, the online telemedicine. And then think about it, any of the companies that were sort of depending on while a bricks and mortar economy's been shut down, those are the ones that have seen their wealth surge dramatically. And as you said, we're talking about 657 billionaires whose combined wealth is, 1.3 trillion increase in the last year, but they have 4.2 trillion total, which is almost double the amount of the wealth of the bottom half of U.S. households. So these folks have reaped enormous windfalls in this pandemic.
Chuck, could you also respond to the ultra-millionaire tax proposals that Sanders was just talking about, what we played? And also, in 2018, you wrote that the effective rate of tax on the billionaire class was lower than for most middle-income taxpayers. Explain what the effective rate of tax is, and again, your response to the proposal for an ultra-millionaire tax.
Well, it really is a good time to be talking about taxing the very wealthy. The effective rate is really what's the percentage of your income and wealth that you pay in taxes, and the billionaire class is down to about 23%, which is like a 70-year low. That's the level at which many school teachers pay their tax rates. So a wealth tax along the lines, the ultra-millionaire tax that's been proposed. Senator Sanders is going to introduce his reformed estate tax bill, the 99.5% bill today. Those are the kinds of legislation that will raise significant money from that billionaire class we estimated, Americans for Tax Fairness and Institute for Policy Studies estimated that the wealth tax, half the revenue, would come from billionaires. Over 10 years, almost $1.5 trillion of revenue would come just from billionaires. So it would go a long way toward making the tax system more fair and restoring the lost progressivity that we had in past decades.
And Chuck, it's clear that, of course, the U.S. was not the only country that saw billionaires increasing their wealth exponentially during the pandemic. There's another report that tracks global wealth called the Huron Global Rich List, and it found that in addition to billionaires, of course, increasing their wealth, the world also added 607 new billionaires, and that's 3 billionaires every 2 days. So could you talk about how this happened globally and where this wealth is most concentrated, the US, China, and India?
Yeah, it's a good question, and we're going to release an analysis of the 1-year mark on global wealth, but let me give you a preview. The global billionaire class, there's about 2,360 billionaires globally. Their wealth increased $4 trillion. So that group has $12 trillion. And if we were to levy a kind of Warren-style wealth tax on the global billionaires, just in 1 year, that would raise about $350 billion. It would cost about $140 billion to vaccinate the world, according to Oxfam. So, that's the juxtaposition that we're looking at in the pandemic. But the common thing that these billionaires have, the ones that are really extracting enormous windfalls, is their Main Street business commerce competition has been shut down. I mean, it's clear, take an example like Amazon, the Main Street bookstore and retailer is shuttered. They're consolidating. These bigger billionaire-owned companies are consolidating their ownership in certain sectors, and it's both the things that we need. It's also diversions. Snapchat, sort of gaming, online gaming. All those things have also there's a huge amount of wealth that's been extracted from these companies that own some of the online gaming firms. And the United States billionaires only account for less than a third of this global wealth. There's a tremendous amount of new wealth in China, in Hong Kong, but that what they all have in common is they benefit from the adversity and the artificial conditions that the pandemic has created in the marketplace.
I wanted to go back to Jeff Bezos. Earlier this week, we spoke to Stuart Applebaum, president of the Retail, Wholesale and Department Store Union, talking about how Amazon treated workers during the pandemic. They're attempting to unionize the first Amazon warehouse in Bessemer, Alabama.
Amazon cut people's wages in the middle of the pandemic. At the end of May, they eliminated the $2 hazard pay they had been giving, even though the pandemic continued to rage, even though the hazards were just as bad, if not worse, as they had been before. And why did they do it? They didn't do it because they needed to. You talked about how much money Bezos has made during this period. They did it because they thought they could get away with it. Oxfam put out a report that said if Jeff Bezos had given every one of his employees a bonus of $105,000, Bezos still would have been wealthier at the end of the pandemic than he was at the beginning.
So let's talk about that, Chuck. Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos saw his personal wealth increase by $65 billion, more than $7 million every hour. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking with Danny Glover, who is going down along with Bernie Sanders and others for the final push days of the Amazon unionization drive effort in Bessemer. The significance of them fighting, spending millions fighting this unionization, and yet you look at the massive pandemic profiteering that he is engaged in.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that Bezos and Amazon hired, 450,000 new workers during the pandemic globally, 800,000 workers now in the U.S. Many of them were sent into the viral line of fire with inadequate protection. I've talked to lots of Amazon workers in warehouses in the north where even they are unionized in some cases, but they are still, being forced to work in unsafe conditions. Amazon could have done so much more. They could have kept hazard pay in place. They could allow workers to organize. They could share the wealth with their employees, but instead they've hoarded the wealth at the top. The average Amazon worker has seen their pay go up less than $1 over the year, but compared to Bezos's, as you point out, thousands of dollars an hour that he's reaping from the situation. So it's really great that people like Danny Glover and others are standing and organizing, standing with the workers in Alabama in their struggle, because this is a pivotal moment to push back on these sort of oligarchic owners. Same with Musk. Musk, again, sending his workers back into the factories without adequate protection, while these billionaires sit in their own protective bubbles.
We want to thank you so much, Chuck Collins, and we're going to link to your report. Chuck Collins is director of the Institute for Policy Studies program on inequality. That new report, A Year of Billionaire Pandemic Gains. He's the author of The Wealth Hoarders, How Billionaires Pay Millions to Hide Trillions. Next up, the House Armed Services Committee holds a hearing on extremism in the armed forces. 1 in 5 of those arrested in connection with the deadly January 6th Capitol insurrection have served or are now serving in the military. Stay with us.